In this question, we've got two goods, X and Y, and they've got a positive cross elasticity of demand. That means that they are substitutes, and there is an upward sloping supply curve, as we would expect. What will be the effect of a reduction in the price of good Y? So first of all, if the price of good Y falls, the demand for good Y will rise. So B is incorrect. If the price of good Y falls, more people will buy good Y, therefore fewer people will buy the substitute good X, so the demand for good X will fall, so A is also incorrect. Let's go down to D. The quantity of good X supplied will increase. Well, we've just said that fewer people are going to want to buy good X, therefore the quantity of good X supplied will fall, will move along that upward sloping supply curve. And that leaves us with just option C. The price of good X will decrease. So the demand for good X is going to fall, therefore the demand curve will shift inwards, and that's going to reduce the price of good X. So C is the correct answer. In answering this question, it's probably a really good idea to draw at least one diagram, and probably two, one showing the market for Y and one showing the market for X. In this question, we're asked to consider the advantages of using the price mechanism as a method of rationing goods and services. When we're thinking about the price mechanism, we're thinking about supply and demand. We could just say, what are the advantages of using the free market? I think that's a very helpful way of looking at this question. Okay, let's go with A first of all. It ensures that goods are allocated in accordance with the wants of customers. Okay, well, not a bad answer. I think this could have caused a bit of confusion, but it's not taken into the supply side, not taken into account the supply side of the economy, and also it's not taken into account effective demand. Just because I want something doesn't mean that I can necessarily demand it. Okay. B, it ensures that suppliers cannot make excessive profits. Well, the price mechanism of the market does allow, as we know, for abnormal profits if there is monopoly power in the market. So I'm afraid that B is also wrong. Let's go down to D. Allocation of goods is determined by consumers' wealth. Well, that simply isn't true. We don't determine the allocation of goods through wealth. So I'm really hoping that C is the correct answer. No one can be prevented from consuming goods if they're willing and able to pay the market price. In a pure free market economy, that would be the case. Remember, there would be no government intervention at all. On this question, we're being asked about progressive, proportional and regressive taxation. And we have got to give this one a little bit of thought, I think, okay? So we know that on the first 20,000, there's no tax being paid. So if you earn up to £20,000, you're not paying any tax at all. So therefore the marginal rate of tax is zero and the average rate of tax is zero from up to 20,000. So that would be proportional. Okay, so it's clearly not D, regressive throughout the income range. So we can reject D at this point. Okay. It's not progressive throughout the whole range because we've just said that below 20,000 it's proportional. So it's not B either. Okay, so now we've got to work out whether it's progressive or proportional as you go above 20,000. Now, I think the natural thing an easy mistake to make is to think, well, it's 20% for everybody who is earning over £20,000, therefore it must be C proportional. And that's true of the marginal rate of taxation, but not the average rate of taxation. The average rate of taxation changes as your income rises. So, for example, a worker who is earning $20,000 in this case will be paying zero tax. So 0% of their income is paid in tax. Okay. If you were earning £21,000 in income, dollars in income, then you'd be paying £200 tax, and therefore you'd be paying 0.95% of your income in tax. If you were earning $30,000, you'd be paying £2,000 in tax, and that's 6.7% of your income. If you're earning $100,000, you would be paying $16,000 in tax, and that would be 16% of your income. So now it appears that this tax rate is progressive over $20,000. Okay, so that's the correct answer. So it's A. It's important to remember that the worker who's earning over 20,000 isn't paying any tax on the initial 20,000. The most important word on this question, I think, is not. So we're being asked what would not be a reason for nationalising the railways. A. Private rail companies often charge high ticket prices. Well, if they do charge high ticket prices, that's going to price a lot of consumers out of the market. So that would be used as an argument for nationalisation. Private rail companies may exploit monopoly power and therefore charge very high prices and restrict output, and that would be a good argument for nationalising the railways. That's the natural monopoly argument. Railways are an essential part of national infrastructure. Well, if we believe that, then anything that's essential, we could argue, is too important to be looked after by the private sector, and therefore it should be nationalised. And the last one, D, should be treated as a public good. Well, it's not a public good, I'm afraid. Railways are, you could argue, a merit good, but not a public good. So D is the correct answer. In this question, we've got a depreciation of the pound against other currencies, and we've been asked basically to say what's that going to do to AD and AS. So a depreciation will encourage exports and discourage imports, so that's going to increase aggregate demand. So the aggregate demand curve is going to shift out. That puts us at A and D. It might now be more expensive for us to buy the raw materials that we need to produce goods and services if we have to import those raw materials. Maybe capital is more difficult to come by because we have to import that capital. So it's likely that aggregate supply will fall. So that's going to shift the aggregate supply curve inwards, and that leaves us at point A. Sometimes we just have to remember facts. One of these occasions is illustrated by this question: which item is not included in the current account of the balance payments? Well, exports and services are, interest on foreign loans are, profits from foreign investments are, but the purchase of foreign assets aren't. They are in the financial account. Here we're being asked to say what happens when we impose a tariff. Prior to the tariff being imposed, we were operating at the free trade level. So P1 was the price and world supply was the supply curve that we are using. So Q1 would have been supplied by domestic suppliers, and Q5 would have been demanded and supplied overall. So therefore Q1 to Q5 was being supplied by importers prior to the tariff. After the tariff, we move up to P2, and now we can see that Q2 is being supplied by domestic producers, and Q4 is being supplied and demanded overall. Therefore, we've moved from Q1, Q5 to Q2, Q4, and the answer is therefore B.